Carol Starr. Carol is a brain injury survivor, a national keynote speaker, the author of an award-winning book titled To Root and to Rise, Accepting Brain Injury, the founder and facilitator of Brain Injury Voices, which is a nationally recognized survivor volunteer group in Maine. Carol is also a friend of ours, and we are so happy to welcome her for coming on here today and talking with us about brain injury and acceptance, transformation after trauma. Carol, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Joyce. Thank you so much for the invite to be here. I'm really happy to get to meet all of you and to have a chance to tell a little bit about my story and to share what I've learned in going on 23 years of living with brain injury. So in that time, I have gone from absolutely hating this new person that I am now to finding ways to live a new life, finding a way to like myself again. So it's an honor to get to talk to other brain injury survivors and to share what I've learned in the hopes that some of my strategies, some of my story might resonate with some of your stories. And then I think that there's such power when we as survivors talk to one another, because we are living common experiences. And when we can share what we know, and because we all know how hard this path is, and sharing what we learned can make the path just a little bit easier. I know that in my own journey, I gained so much from survivors who are further along the path than I was. And now that I'm a ways down the path, I get to share, what I've learned. So again, thank you for the invite to be here. I like to look for silver linings in things. And one of the silver linings of this pandemic is Zoom, is being able to talk to groups like this. I'm coming to you from Maine right now. So I understand that you guys are coming from all over the country. Yes. So, this kind of group wouldn't even have been possible just a few years ago. That this has made connections among us so much more possible than it was. So I am definitely grateful, for that. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm going to talk about my journey and about coming to terms with brain injury, share my story, and share what I've learned about acceptance. And please, I would like this to be a dialogue as we go through this. So if you have a question, I've got my screen so I can see all of you in front of me. So if you've got a question, just raise your hand. Like if I somehow don't see you, like you say, Carol, got a question. Because all of our questions are good, and they will take us in a good direction to learn from one another. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about who I was on July 5th, 1999. That was the day before my car accident that caused my brain injury. At the time, I was 32 years old. And two of the ways that I defined myself was I was a teacher, I was a musician. I think all of us have those kind of ways that we look at ourselves. And for me, those were two of them. I had been a teacher pretty much always. I was one of those kids that I'd go to school all day, then I'd come home and I'd play school. My poor little sister, I was always the teacher. I never let her be the teacher. I was always the teacher. Pretty much every job I ever had, somehow I'd find a way I'd end up in some kind of a teaching role within that job. I was also a musician. I had played the violin since I was 9 years old. I played in an orchestra. I was also a singer. I sang in a chorale. And in my orchestra, there are people in their 80s who are still performing. And I thought, that's going to be me someday. That I imagined that I would be a classical musician, till the end of my days. That there are some people who like loud rock music. I liked loud classical music. Yeah, I'm that geek. I fully admit it. I was also a daughter. I was a sister. I was a friend. I figured I was going to add wife and mother to that kind of list of identities, at some point. I was somebody who I valued my intelligence, my quick intellect, that I was pretty much your type A, kind of person, the hard charging kind of driven sort of person. I was confident that, I can take whatever you throw at me. I can learn my way through it. Then came July 6th, 1999, which threw all of that kind of out the window. It challenged everything that I thought I knew about myself. And what happened was I was on my way from one teaching job to another, and I was broadsided on the driver's side by somebody going about 50 miles an hour. And in that moment, my life changed forever. The last thing I remember is a really loud sound of metal on metal. Then I don't remember anything else. But what did happen is the car spun, kind of went across the median. Airbags went off, all the windows broke, kind of crumpled in on the driver's side. The next thing that I remember is that there was somebody at my driver's window yelling at me, "Get out, get out, get out." It turns out that was actually the driver of the other car. So I think I lost consciousness at the moment of impact, but I don't remember. There must have been a few minutes when I was unconscious, because it probably took him a few minutes to kind of get his bearings and to come over to my own car. But that an off-duty paramedic stopped by, had me lie down until the ambulance came. Don't remember the ambulance ride to the hospital, the brain injury. The signs of it were there, but they didn't really ask me the right questions. They said, "Did you hit your head?" I said, "No," because I don't remember hitting my head. They didn't ask me, "Does your head hurt?" My head hurt, but in my confused state, I didn't know to tell them that. They also said, "Do you remember everything?" I said, "Yes." I didn't realize that I didn't remember car spinning, airbags going off, glass breaking. I have no memory of any of that. It wasn't until weeks later, when other people told me about accidents that they had been and they described these things, that all of a sudden I realized I have no memory of any of those things. And so whenever I talk to medical folks about brain injury, I always talk about how, the questions that you ask us, they really make a difference, because we tend to be a little literal. We can't always answer or kind of extrapolate what you want, what the information that you want us to give you. It was actually the first physical therapist that I saw who realized that there was more going on for me than just whiplash, that I indeed had a brain injury. And the symptoms were pretty much hidden from me when I was basically at home resting, kind of with the whiplash. I couldn't get around very much. Other people were bringing me food. It was really when I tried to start going back to my regular life, that's when it became apparent that I'm really having a lot of troubles. That I tried to go back to my teaching. I was only teaching at the time like 4 hours a week, 2 hours one day, 2 hours another day. And 2 hours of teaching would put me on the couch for 2 days. I would be so tired from it. I would look at the lesson plan that I had written. It was like it was Greek. I could read the words, but I didn't quite know what to do. I'd stick my students in groups and just kind of leave them there because I couldn't figure out what to do. Every time they'd walk into the room, I'd say, "Are you new?" Because I wouldn't remember who they were from session to session. I would go into the ladies' room during the break and just look at myself in the mirror and go, "Carol, what's wrong with you? Why? I've been teaching for years, forever. Why can't I get this?" I tried to go back to my music. The first rehearsal that I tried to go back to, I remember when I went into the room and everybody was kind of warming up, and it was like the sound was just everywhere in my head, and I couldn't seem to focus. I opened my violin case and one of my strings had broken. I'd been changing violin strings for like decades. All of a sudden I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Stand partner had to change my violin string. I looked at the group, and I've been playing in this orchestra for like 10 years. I didn't even know where to sit. I did the same seat for 10 years and I didn't know where to sit. And I lasted just like less than a minute or two trying to play this piece, and the sound was so loud, and I just ran from the room. Then realized I don't know how to get home, so a friend had to drive me, and I didn't understand it quite then. But brain injury had left me with hyperacusis. Some of you might be familiar with that $10 word, where my brain hears sounds as much louder than they really are, which seems like a especially cruel affliction to give to a musician. But it's like I couldn't listen or be anywhere near music anymore because it sounded just like it was everywhere in my head. For a long time, when planes would go overhead, I would duck because to me, it sounded so loud. It sounded like it was coming in the room with me. I mean, I almost called the airport. I was convinced that the airport had changed the flight pattern of the planes and they were now buzzing my house. I'm really glad I didn't call because they would have thought I had lost my mind. It seemed like the harder I tried to go back to my life, the more everything just fell apart. I struggled with family gatherings. When there were a lot of people together and everybody was talking, I would overload. I would cry. I would want to run away because I couldn't manage all of the sound and the too much going on. And it felt like my whole life was disintegrating, was falling apart right in front of me. All of the ways that I had defined myself as a teacher, as a musician, as a daughter, as a sister, all of those things were falling apart. But yet I looked just fine. I still looked like Carol. Everybody kept saying, "But you look great." I'm sure many of us have heard that phrase. I hate that phrase. So some of the symptoms that I dealt with a lot back then, and I still deal with even to this day, are mental fatigue. I mean, it's not as bad as it used to be, but I still get very brain tired easily. I deal with sound and light sensitivity. I see things as brighter than they are. I hear things as louder than they really are. I have memory issues with attention and concentration. Sometimes like if something's like really emotional, I have trouble kind of processing emotional things. I overload if there's too much going on at once. All of those symptoms that make life challenging. And those kind of symptoms, as we well know, they lead to that loss of identity, that loss of who are we now. Before this, I didn't know that I could be shaken this much, that my whole sense of who I am could be shaken this deeply, because I lost some of my independence, that I needed help with a lot of tasks, like how do I cook? I ate cottage cheese for dinner most nights. Why cottage cheese? I have no idea. I didn't eat it before, but somehow that's kind of what I fixated on. Still to this day, when I get overwhelmed, out comes the cottage cheese. I needed help figuring out, how do I get basic life tasks done? How do I take care of myself at home? All of those sorts of things. Lost some of my sense of competence, that, I couldn't teach anymore. I couldn't do music anymore. I couldn't function at the level that I was used to functioning at. I couldn't trust anymore. How was I going to react in situations that if something was a little bit emotional, I used to sob over. If there was something like a commercial on television that was just the least bit emotional, I would just sob over that. And I was so embarrassed by my symptoms because I just never knew when they were going to come out, when I was going to get so tired that I couldn't function, that I couldn't even stand up, and somebody was going to have to rescue me and drive me home. And I wanted to hide it from everybody, that I didn't feel like I could be proud of myself anymore. There were a lot of times when I almost wished, because I looked fine, maybe if I had a cane or a cast, maybe if I had something that would tell people, look, I have a disability, I'm struggling here. But I don't think I don't think any of that would have made a difference, because people don't understand brain injury unless they've lived it. It's hard. This is a hard injury for folks to understand. It was the worst grief of my life. That, when I compare it to like the grief we've all felt over losing loved ones, brain injury grief, it was worse. Because this time, I was the one who died, but yet I was still here, because the old me died, on July 6th, 1999. And the fact that I was a type A person kind of made it worse. Every counselor that I met with told me that type A people like me tended to have a harder time with the acceptance process, had a harder time accepting the limitations of brain injury, that life was different after brain injury. And yeah, they were all right. I had a very difficult time coming to terms with the fact that I'm different. There were times, more than I like to admit, I did think about ending my life. I thought about, I can't do this. I am not strong enough for this. I'm really glad that I didn't. But I did have those thoughts after brain injury. So Joyce read you part of one of my Phoenix poems. I'm actually going to read you this, because those are a pair of poems. I'm actually going to read you the first one. And actually, if you also make me a co-host, I have a little PowerPoint that goes along with the poem that I can do a screen share. All right, everybody seeing my screen?
Yes.
All right, we got it. So I'm just going to read you this poem, and this is a poem that I wrote. It was 9-10 months post injury. This is when I was very lost, when I had no idea what life was going to hold for me. That how was I going to move forward as a brain injury survivor, and at the time, I couldn't walk very far because I was still dealing with the physical injuries from the accident. And I could kind of walk down to the end of my street. And it was fall. And I could walk down, and there was this tree that was kind of in all of her fall glory. And I was just mesmerized by this tree. And it made me think about myself and brain injury and what does it mean? And my neighbors probably wonder, because every day I would go take a walk and I would just look at that tree. So this is the poem that I wrote. At the end of my street, on the edge of the marsh, stands a tree. She does more than stand. She commands your attention. Full of her fall flash. No ordinary red, orange, and yellow for her. She sparkles with crimson, magenta, umber, and ochre plumage. A rising phoenix with outstretched wings, confident and bold. But her time is brief. Perhaps her colors burn too brightly. Her plumage dulls, darkens, and drops, exposing frail gray bones, pale and naked. Who is she now? The tree will have her time again. Will I? When I wrote that, I had no idea how to answer that question. The tree will have her time again. Will I? Is my life over? Is it just beginning? What is it? It took me another 4 or 5 years before I could answer that question. And I'll read the companion poem at the end. So I've kind of covered some of the numerous ways that brain injury sucks. All of the losses that I dealt with, that many of us deal with. So now it's all right. What do we do about those losses? How do we come to terms with these new people that we are? Early on, I wanted somebody to give me a step-by-step plan for all of this stuff. but honestly, there isn't one. That I think each one of us as survivors, we each find our own way. But I think there are landmarks along the way, that ideas, ways of thinking that can help us to move towards acceptance. I'm going to share some of those landmarks, and maybe they will spark some thinking in your own journey. So I think probably one of the biggest landmarks for me along the way of accepting the new Carol was recognizing that the old Carol is gone. For probably the first 4 or 5 years, I was really focused on, I have to get back to who I was. That all of the therapies, everything that I was doing was about how close can I get to old Carol. And then everything that I did, I compared against my old self, and pretty much I always came up lacking. Then one day I was meeting with my counselor, and I had this whole laundry list of like return to old life failures, because of course, every time I tried to go back to who I was, I failed because I can't do the things that I used to do. And she said to me, she said, Carol, is it possible for you to accept that you're not going to make a full recovery? And that question just hit me like a ton of bricks. I learned later on that she'd been asking me that question like for months and months and months in various forms, but I didn't hear it till that particular day. That was the day that I was ready to hear it. And I just burst into tears. But what I realized was, it kind of, as I thought about it later on, that I had been doing way too much comparing to the old Carol, because the old Carol, she's gone. And that it's not fair to compare myself to her, because I will always lose. I mean, the old Carol could work a full-time job, could then go to a rehearsal at night, do all these family gatherings, things that even now, nearly 23 years later, I still cannot do. That I cannot hold a candle in that respect to the old Carol. So if I compare, I'm always going to come out on the short end. But if I compare to where I was, early on, when, I took, 4 to 5 naps, every day, where I felt like I was asleep more often than I was awake, when I couldn't listen to music at all, when even an hour of a family gathering was too much for me, then my progress is stunning. That the only comparison that matters is the comparison that starts on the day of our injuries, the day of our strokes, the day we became brain injury survivors. That's the day that matters. And that's a fair comparison. Everything else is not. That's a landmark on the way to accepting. I think that's one of the biggest ones. Another big one was figuring out, well, what do I do with myself now? Okay, I can't work anymore, can't do music anymore. Yeah, what do I do? And it was really weird, but there was this little voice inside me that was whispering to me, make something. Which I tried to ignore that voice for quite a while, because I'm like, who the heck is that? Carol does not make things. This is not something I'm interested in. Old Carol didn't make things. New Carol wanted to make something. And at first I didn't know what to do. I went to the craft store once, got completely overwhelmed, left in tears with nothing. And then a friend said, well, try paint by number. I think it was because her daughters were doing paint by number at the time. So once I had a kind of a plan as to something to try, went right to the paint by number section, got my little paint by number, and this is it. It's a good thing I'm a pack rat. I save all this stuff. So this is the very first thing that I made. This paint by number. Took me months and months to do this, because at the time I could only work on this for about 15 minutes at a time. That I'd be so tired, I'd have to take a nap for like 2 hours. But I loved working on this. I liked the colors. I liked seeing it come together. It felt like I was starting to be successful at something. Like this was something that I could do. That when I was trying to go back to my old life, all it was fail, 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 fail. This, I was having success, even though it was little success, but it was still, I felt successful at it. And the more I worked at it, I could see that my attention and my concentration were getting better as I was working on this, kind of a little bit at a time. And I liked seeing that. And this also, it didn't trigger all those feelings of loss for me. Every time I tried to go back to old me, I see you, Rob, I'll get there. I would feel a lot of loss because, well, old me could do it this way, but this didn't trigger loss because I'd never done this before. It was brand new. So go ahead, Rob, you had a question. And you're on mute right now. Still on mute. There you go.
How's now?
I can hear you now.
Well, that's great. So that was terrific. And that is terrific.
Thank you.
Because what was is.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. Thank you.
And so once I did this paint by number, then it's like, well, what else could I do? So I did one more paint by number. Then I felt like, all right, I'm done with paint by number now. So, well, what else? So I learned how to make jewelry. I also got into things like doing cross stitching. I did photography, like all the photos that you saw in the little poem thing that I did. Those are all my own photos that I have manipulated like through apps. That suddenly I wasn't just a brain injury survivor who lost her previous life. I was somebody who made things. That finding that new identity, that who are we now? That defining ourselves in a different way. Clem, if you get a question?
Yes. First of all, I want to congratulate you because I know myself, I had a brain injury in 05. And all of the things you're discussing, yes, been there, done that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to commend you for coming and talking about it to other people. No one can really understand that. I certainly can understand far more than that, because for 7 years I was like a zombie because my memory was so bad I couldn't remember what I had for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just forgot everything all day long for 7 years. So, but I tried. But you can't compare who you are to what you were before.
Mm-hmm.
Or what you can do is look at what you have to offer now and try to raise the value of your own life by raising the value of everybody else's life. For me, I use humor a lot. You know, like they tell you look good. I know that. I mean, no sense in pointing out the obvious, but okay.
Yeah, because that's a good segue, because that's actually another one of my strategies is humor. Is fine. It's like, brain injury is not funny, but we can find those little pieces of it that are funny. Like, for example, I named mine because a lot of times it feels like I have two people. There's me, and then there's the brain injury. And I'll tell you, my brain injury, she is a diva. She is the one in charge. She gets what she wants when she wants it. And so, she's kind of a drama queen. So I said, all right, let's give her a dramatic name. So I call her Brainhilda. So my family, my friends, my whole medical team, they all say, oh, all right, how's Brainhilda doing? Everybody knows Brainhilda at this point. So it's one of my ways of putting, she has a whole character kind of in my head.
Yep.
I also make jokes about probably still my most challenging symptom, which is the mental fatigue. that, I have napped, every day, oftentimes more than once a day,
Yep.
for 20 something years now. So one day I told my doctor, I said, I've had so much beauty sleep that one of these days I'm going to wake up as a supermodel.
Yes, exactly.
I also, because of the fatigue, not as much now, but particularly years ago, it meant that sometimes when Brainhild is taking me down, it pretty much didn't matter where it was.
Yep.
That it would get dramatic fast, that I would have to lie down oftentimes in public places, because like when I was done. And at least
Yep.
earlier on, she didn't always give me too much warning. I could go from being relatively okay to it's lie down or fall down at time. So that has meant lying down in public places. So I have had naps on benches at more Panera Breads than I can count. I have took a nap in the coffin display room at a funeral home. Not in a coffin. There was a couch there. I've rested in a couch at a bar. I mean, I had not been drinking. I figured the sign said, bar and lounge. On a bench outside the Canadian Potato Museum,
Yep.
on a fishing boat, in the conference room of my U.S. Senator in Washington, D.C. So my joke that I tell people is I sleep around.
Yep.
So humor, that's another way of dealing with this. And the humor, it's ours to own. That nobody can take that away from us, that we decide what we want to make light of in our own injuries.
Tara, Rob has a question.
Yes, go ahead, Rob. Once you unmute.
It's a comment, and that is that Brainhilda is the scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz.
I like it. That's good.
Carol,
Yes.
I got to tell you, I think that humor is very important. As
Yes,
a matter of fact,
very good.
for our local support group, we got to the point where we meet for breakfast on Friday mornings. And sometimes there's as many as 30 people there. We have quite a bit. I make a lot of fun of it. As a matter of fact, it took them a while to get used to this because we have a saying where the gates are down. In other words, if somebody says something inappropriate, okay, the gates were down. He didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
to accentuate that, I told everybody I call this meeting, the breakfast, the vegetable soup group. Because we all used to be vegetables.
Yep.
We sometimes call our support group Cheers, but where everybody forgets your name.
Yeah, exactly.
I
So-
have a similar type of story. I suffered a hemorrhagic stroke about 17 years ago. And I was a creative director and strategic partner of my group. I was hired by myself, and I used to do a creative brain dump, and I was in charge of several things all at once. And when my brain exploded, all that was gone. And I had to learn everything from a baby perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I had to learn everything quickly and I wanted to be impressive, and I couldn't talk for about 2 years.
You've come a long
Wow.
way.
And I found one speech therapist who taught me to sing. And that singing is the way the brain works. A combination of songs and sounds. And I learned how to sing my answers back to people. And 18 months later, voila. And I still get tired every day.
Yep, me too.
I had to have to take a nap, and I struggle with things one at a time. And I learned that my brain is working on becoming normal. Becoming as best as I can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And
Yes.
no problems. And the most challenging thing I received, and my speech therapist encouraged me to take advantage of my sixth sense of humor. And I grew up as a creative director, art director, things that I love, so that she said, either stand-up comedy or an improv group to set yourself free. And I chose the stand-up comedy group, and for 5 years I was did a routine for 8 minutes, and I talked about my stroke.
Terrific.
And every time I felt I was lost, and I looked up at the lights and settled down and remembered to the routine.
I think you bring up a really good point about how we move forward. Is it's not about going back. It is about going forward with who we are now.
Yep.
I mean, that I have long since given up ever trying to be the Carol of July 5th, 1999. But I will, to my dying day, I will continue to work towards progress, because neuroplasticity is real. We
Yep.
will
Yes.
continue to improve always.
Absolutely.
It doesn't, we might not be able to get back to who we were.
Yeah, I want to interrupt you, Carol, because Anne runs a group that is a sing-along group, and tell her what Carol said when she sang. And named Carol.
What was that?
Isn't her name Carol? It was filmed.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Sorry, I'm missing something.
Okay, not you, Carol, but Anne, isn't her name Carol?
Carol Edmo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Well, Carol, I run a group called the Backstrokes, which meets online every Monday at 11 a.m. and it's a sing-along group. So we all take turns choosing songs. We have songbooks. I put the lyrics up on the screen.
Mhm. Yep.
And we have people who've been singing with us for 10 years.
Awesome.
And it helps speech over the long
Mhm.
haul. And if you sing once a week, it helps during that week between singing sessions. So I
Yeah.
think we've seen a lot of progress, and people share that they've made progress, and we can see it too. But you forget, in the moment, you kind of forget that someone didn't speak as well 5 years ago. But
Thank you. Gene has his hand up. Gene?
Yeah, how do you guys, Carol, how do you do this without family support? I mean, I don't have no family support whatsoever. I
Mm.
was told by my foster parents when I was awarded my disability that I was worthless to them and the government. And I just had my sixth stroke February 20th.
Really?
And yeah,
Wow.
it's hard going through this
Mhm.
without family support.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could imagine. I can only imagine that it is. Yes, because I have had family support. I do live alone, which has definitely made it hard to do at times. But I do have family here in the area, and I think we all do the best that we can, and finding community, with each other as best we can. Finding staff who help us,
Yeah.
kind of that one little bit, at a time, not comparing our journeys to each other, because what might be easy for me might be hard for somebody else, and vice versa. That we might share similar things, but doesn't mean that all of our journeys are going to be the same. Because some things are going to be harder for some people than others, just because of circumstances. And finding that support wherever we can, whether it is in support groups, through programs. I know for me, the more that I focus on what I don't have, the worse I feel.
Yeah.
When I focus on what I do have, that I feel better. When I focus on, what do I need to find? What actions can I take? I feel better. Go ahead, Clem.
What I think is so critical for everybody to understand it. We are survivors. We have lived through something that is very difficult for anybody at any time, at any age. And the fact that we can look at it as a curse, or we can look at it as an opportunity to learn so much more and to become more ourselves, and not be blaming ourselves, but actually feeling lucky enough to overcome this, and to find people who are so willing to help us to overcome it. That is a blessing that a lot of people never get, and they may never have even had a brain injury.
Mhm.
Thank you, Clem. That was important to say. Sarah, you want to wrap it up?
Well, really, I'm taking all kinds of notes, but Carol, wow. Thank you so much. This is such a great message. It's hard for everybody, but really the lessons help everybody in their own individual way. And we're all learning that together, finding the new and what that means. What do you do with the old, especially if you feel the old is no longer viable at all.
Yeah.
And then being able to move forward, not move on, not get over anything, but how to take those steps forward.
You have a copy of your book, Carol? You have a copy? Thank you.
Yeah. Good.
That's it. That's it.
Mhm.
what's the name of the book again?
It's called To Root and to Rise, Accepting Brain Injury.
And I'm going to interrupt you really quick because I got to tell you, I love this book. And one of the things that's really great about it for all of you is it's also set up almost as a workbook. So there's the
Yeah.
chapter, some really great stories and information, tips and hints, and what works for Carol, because obviously, and she'll be the first to tell you, what works for her is not guaranteed to work for anybody else. But the way that the book is laid out with the workbook pages incorporated into it, really powerful. And it really encourages some introspection and looking in all directions, not just backwards, not just forward, but look all over. And I loved that part of the book very much. It's a great book.
Yes, because acceptance was so hard for me that that's
Acceptance
why I
is
chose this as a
brutal.
topic.
Yeah.
Well, I gotta tell you, Carol, I'm so impressed. I really am. I'm glad you got a chance to see me. And I gotta warn you right now, going forward, tap dance injuries are the worst. So
What are?
tap dance injuries are the worst. So you can be careful when you're dancing.
Okay, all right. I will stay away from tap dancing.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'm just gonna circle back because I want to be conscious of everyone's time. But Joyce, I'm gonna let you wrap us up. And one more time, I just really want to thank you, Carol, so much.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol.
You're
Thanks,
very welcome.
Carol.
Glad to have been here.